Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a collection of sources that offer a pretty critical look at the Baha'i faith, a religion that many people know for its message of unity. You know, when most people think of the Baha'i faith, they probably think of peace, unity, and this idea of a universal brotherhood. That's definitely the public image. But there's a whole other side of this story, one that comes from former members and researchers. And they present a starkly different picture, one that's filled with some pretty serious allegations of corruption, a rewritten history, and authoritarian control. So in this explainer, we're going to walk through the main arguments coming from these critical sources. We'll look at claims of financial trouble, a contested history, and issues with internal control. And then we'll see what the critics' final verdict is on the faith. Okay, let's jump right in with the first section, which really sets up the core conflict that these critics are pointing to. So at the very heart of all this criticism is one central claim, that there's a massive gap between the peaceful, unified image the faith projects to the world and what's actually happening on the inside. The sources we're looking at say this isn't just a small inconsistency, it's a fundamental contradiction. Let's dig into the specific examples they use to back this up. All right, let's move into the first major area of criticism, and it's a big one: financial misconduct. The sources kick things off with a pretty concrete financial scandal that they claim is a symptom of much bigger problems. One of the sources zeroes in on a major financial mess within the Italian Baha'i community. We're talking about a former general secretary of their National Spiritual Assembly who was officially charged with embezzling 360,000 euros. And according to the source, this wasn't some simple fraud case. The man at the center of it, Franco Ceccarini, was supposedly a super trusted, longtime official. The whole scheme allegedly involved fake invoices stretching over 14 years, and get this, it was apparently only discovered because Italian tax authorities started investigating him, not because of any internal checks. The financial hit was apparently so bad that the faith's top international body, the Universal House of Justice, had to give them a 200,000 euro loan just to soften the blow. But here's the thing, according to the sources, this isn't just a story about one guy. The critics argue it points to some really deep, systemic weaknesses in how the Baha'i faith is run. They talk about a total lack of financial transparency at the top, no basic safeguards like requiring 2 signatures on bank accounts, and get this, no term limits for officials. They claim that creates the perfect environment for potential misconduct to happen. And the allegations, well, they go way beyond just that one case in Italy. Other critical sources raise even more serious red flags. They mention accusations of money laundering that involve Baha'i counselors in Egypt, and even rumors of wealthy members in the Gulf being used as channels for arms smuggling back during the Iran-Contra affair. They also bring up questions about funds possibly being moved to offshore accounts in the Pacific Islands. Okay, so shifting gears from money, the sources also dig deep into the faith's origins. And what they allege is that the early days, far from being peaceful, were actually filled with incredible violence and intense power struggles. Now, this is pretty chilling. One source actually provides this list of names, claiming that the founder of the faith, Baha'u'llah, was involved in killing off his rivals and opponents. These victims were reportedly early believers who just didn't accept his claim to be the new leader, and according to this source, they were systematically taken out. To really understand the critics' argument here, you have to know about this one key document, Baha'u'llah's will. It's called the Book of the Covenant, and it was supposed to make sure that power was transferred smoothly after he died. So this timeline really lays out the whole succession crisis, as the critics tell it. They claim Baha'u'llah's will was clear. His son Abdu'l-Baha would take over, and after him, his younger son, Muhammad Ali. But, they allege, Abdu'l-Baha just ignored that and appointed his own grandson Shoghi Effendi instead. Then the sources say Shoghi Effendi went on to excommunicate all of Baha'u'llah's living relatives. And the final twist? In 1957, he died without a child or a will, leaving no successor and creating what the critics call a permanent legitimacy crisis for the faith. And this whole crisis of legitimacy, critics argue, is exactly what led to an authoritarian leadership structure, one that simply cannot handle any kind of disagreement or dissent. And you can really feel the personal impact of this in the words of former members like Dale Husband. I mean, in his resignation letter, he talks about this painful process of disillusionment, basically concluding that the faith was just incapable of living up to its own teachings because of hypocrisy and an intolerant leadership. So this is really the core of the argument for many critics, this huge gap they see between the faith's progressive teachings and its actual practices. For instance, they point to the principle of equality for men and women, but then highlight that women can't serve on the faith's highest governing body. They question the idea of friendship with all religions when members can get kicked out just for questioning the leadership. And they claim the whole harmony between science and religion thing falls apart when the leader's words are treated as absolute, infallible truth. So, how do they maintain control? Well, the sources allege there's a whole toolkit of strict measures. They talk about excommunicating scholars who ask tough questions and telling followers not to even read anything critical. There's also this really severe tactic called shunning, which is basically a social boycott. Critics claim all these methods are designed to ensure total obedience to a leadership that they say is treated as being practically infallible. Okay, this all brings us to the final, big-picture judgment that these critical sources make. So, when you put it all together, the ultimate conclusion these critics come to is this. The Baha'i Faith's claims of being a divine revelation just don't hold up. They conclude it should be seen as a human-made system, one with all the flaws and contradictions that come with it. And to back this up, critics argue that many of the core teachings, like world peace, aren't actually unique. They traced a lot of the theology back to other traditions like Sufism and Gnosticism. On top of that, they describe Baha'u'llah's writings as basically being derivative of Islamic mystical texts, and some even claim that native Arabic speakers find the language in their holy books to be awkward and repetitive. And some of the most severe critics, like you can see in comments from one of the source articles, they don't hold back at all. For example, one person just dismisses the faith completely, framing it not as a flawed religion, but, in their words, as political bullshit made to take advantage of people and rip them off. So, to wrap it all up, the critical perspective we've looked at today alleges some really profound systemic problems within the Baha'i faith. The sources point to financial scandals and a lack of transparency, a history that they claim is rooted in violence, and a rigid authoritarian leadership that crushes any and all dissent. And this really leaves us with a final question to think about, because the issues raised here go way beyond just one belief system. It makes you wonder, what level of accountability and openness should we really expect from any organization, religious or not, that has so much influence over people's lives?